Okay, so I'm Joy Austin, and I am the Executive Director of Humanities DC. And, very glad to see the faithful ones coming out every week and every month to these meetings as we try to build a network of people who love this city and want to make sure that its legacy, its heritage is preserved, and that in this vineyard it's happening. I can assure you of that. And then newcomers, always newcomers as well. And so we welcome you and we hope you'll come back. I know some of you are here just because we have a living legend in our midst, Miss Zora. And Zora, welcome. Welcome to Humanities DC. I have some notes that I need to bring you guys up to date on, because DC Living Heritage Network was started in 2014. And over the time, you guys have become, this group has become a kind of advocacy organization for humanities and heritage and preservation activities. And one of the main things that we have been doing over the last year or so is monitoring and engaging with the cultural plan that the city has been doing. And so under Jerome Page's leadership, and you send all your best thoughts for Jerome because he's been ill. We want him back here and engaging us the way he does so really well. So I wanted to bring you guys up to date because on Monday, the City Council passed its budget, the budget for FY 2018. And I have a little bit of good news, and I think for many people who did work on this and did show up for Arts Advocacy Day in March, some of this news will be disappointing. So let me tell you the good news first. The good news first is that with the efforts of Councilmember Grasso, the DC Public Library, we've been able to keep in the DC Public Library $200,000 that goes to the Humanities DC and to the Historical Society of Washington DC. And we split it evenly. The Historical Society does a survey of existing archives on DC history, and that could be churches, it could be museums, it could be established archives. And they will continue to do that work. And then jointly, we are training people who want to become oral historians. And then most importantly, we are spending half of the funding that we have, $50,000, to provide grants to organizations and individuals who want to tell the stories of people in the city by doing oral history. So we just completed a group of those oral histories. You were part of that, weren't you, Samir? Yeah, and part of the review committee for that. And so we're going to actually give those funds out today. But the good news is that we'll be able to do the oral history grants next year as well. So that's really, really great news. On the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities side of things, I've got some information about the City Council additional funding. And unfortunately, Humanities Council and Humanities projects, except for one, I would say, did not get any additional funding than what was in the commission budget that the mayor put in. So I think very briefly, I'm sure most of you know this. So the mayor sends a budget to the City Council, and in this case, she sent a budget of $19 million for the commission to the City Council. And then we spend a lot of time trying to persuade the City Council that we need more money. And in our case, 25 of you guys showed up in March, and then kept some pressure on over the last few weeks. And certainly we at Humanities Council did. But I wanted you guys to see how it ended up, because I think you'll find it interesting, and we have copies of it here. Thanks, Amir. Yeah, I think I have enough for us to just pass for everybody. Okay, so we're disappointed. we're disappointed that we don't see this Humanities Council, because we really wanted to be able to add to the funding that we provide in grants. And for the most part, we don't see what we would consider traditional humanities organizations. So what are we going to do about it? So now we've gone back to the administration. And in a couple of weeks, I and my board chair and a couple other people will have a meeting with the mayor. She's going to move forward, and she's going to give us some time to talk with her, to explain who we are, to explain what our work is, to explain how vital it is to do heritage projects at this particular time in the city's history. And this is where I need your help. I don't want to walk in there, me and two other people, or I need your support. And what I need is a letter from you. A letter that says, Humanities DC has given me a grant. If that is the case, I have used it for these purposes. It has helped these numbers of people. Or if you're not a grantee and you think that the work that we're doing is important, write that down. And then I want a really personal statement that says, what do you think is going on in this city now? And why heritage activities, why telling these stories is absolutely critical. So I want 100 of those letters when I go to that meeting in 2 weeks. So you'll be hearing from me over and over again in the next week or so. But I do have, there's a little notice about that's over there. So you can't fail me. You understand? I cannot go and speak just for myself. I have to have this in my hand. And I'll be working with our grantees, who I think are motivated to give us letters like this. But I do want to be able to have those when I walk into the meeting with the mayor in the next couple of weeks. Because the dollars that we are asking for, $200,000, pales in comparison to some of these earmarks or enhancements that the City Council has just made on behalf of organizations. And I'm actually not a person who goes around, trying to pit arts and humanities against each other, because I think we all get too little. But we got to do better than this. And that's the work of the DC Living Heritage Network. It's to bring us together, to bind us together, because what we found is that there are many people thinking about these issues in the city. And so we've had these Tuesday meetings. A number of you in this room come to those Tuesday meetings, this monthly meeting. And as I said, we have been engaging with the cultural plan. A lot of the ideas that came out of these meetings, I hope we'll see in the cultural plan, which brings me to the fact that even though the city has been saying every month that they're going to have a version of the cultural plan out, there actually is a timeline now. So we should be getting a draft on July 14th. There'll be 30 days for public comment. Then they're going to have a stakeholder event on July 28th. The comment period will close on August 11th, and the report is going to be sent to the City Council on September 15th. So Lisa and others, we have work to do. So I spoke with Jerome today from his hospital bed, and we're going to do 2 discussion meetings on the Tuesday, July 18th, and Tuesday, July 25th. Once the plan is ready on July 14th. And then we're going to have a meeting like this on Thursday, July 27th, which is our regular meeting anyway. So a lot of work to be done in the next few weeks. We have to make our mark on the cultural plan. We have to take another shot at getting the mayor to understand who we are and what we're trying to do. And I got to have all of you guys engaged, and your friends and everyone else. I'll take a couple of questions, but and this is just because I know what the main part of this program is. Everybody understands what I'm trying to do. All right. That sounds great. Okay, well, it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Zora. She and I go back a long ways. Gosh, since the 70s. And as a museum educator, Zora is absolutely a legendary person. And there are many, many stories and many accomplishments and work that she has done at the Anacostia Museum that set the stage for how museum education is presented across this country. And so that is a modest statement about the achievements of Zora. But I want to tell you my favorite Zora story, which is the weekend when she went down to Williamsburg and saw nothing in Williamsburg that had any reflection on the African American presence in this country. Yeah, well, if you go now, it'll be shocking to you that this is in fact what happened. And she came back and wrote in the most polite of language and the most blistering of language what she thought of that idea. And it changed the course of Williamsburg, and it changed the course of museum education in this country. So what you see about inclusivity and equity and diversity in museum education really stems from the work that Zora did at Anacostia, but also because she took a stand at Williamsburg. And so these things just don't happen. And that's why the work I'm trying to do and you're trying to do is important. So sometimes it doesn't even register with that level of importance. And I'm sure, I don't know how she felt about that 2 or 3 paragraph letter, but it did change the world, and it did change how museum education is taught. So, Ms. Zora, thank you.
It's true. Well, we do go back a long time.
We do.
And I said a few moments ago that every time I turned around, she was coming in or going out of the museum. She and John Kennard were good friends, and they helped each other along the way. So I'm glad to see you, and glad to see other friends here. And I hope that I'm going to talk about some things that happened a half century ago, before some of you were born. But others of you have been involved with the museum, so if I stumble and fall, speak up. And you add your 2 cents. My computer went out, so I wrote all of these notes down on paper, and I'm just going to read from them or talk from them. I'm not going to read every single word. But again, thank you, Louis, for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here and to share some things that happened while I was the education director at the museum for 27 years. I was working at the Southeast Neighborhood House. There were a lot of settlement houses here 60 years ago. Friendship House, Southwest House, Southeast House, Northwest, all of them, and they're all gone. But I was working at Southeast House, so was John Kennard. He was a community organizer, and I was program director. The Smithsonian called and said, can you set up a meeting with neighborhood people? We want to come and talk about the possibility of setting up a storefront museum. So I did. A lot of people came. Smithsonian people came and they said, this is what we have in mind, a storefront museum. We want it to be a bridge between Anacostia and the mall. And hopefully people will come to Anacostia's museum and they'll get excited about what they see and they'll come on down to the mall. Well, that was their presentation. And the people who came to that meeting were very intrigued. They said, we think this would be a good idea. And it wasn't too long after that, that the Smithsonian decided to put down these roots in Anacostia. There were other parts of the city who had learned about the Smithsonian's intention. They wanted to come to Northwest, they chose Anacostia. And it wasn't too long after that they leased the old Carvey Theater on what was then Nichols Avenue. It's King Avenue now. They turned the keys to the theater over to John on July the 5th. So we're going to open, we want to open by September the 15th. A lot of work to be done. That theater had been vacant for a long time, although from time to time it had been in dance hall, it had been a church, it had been a meeting facility, but it was in bad shape. At any rate, he had not a long time to put it together. And people pitched in. People in the neighborhood would be walking by and come on in, pick up a paintbrush or a hammer or whatever, and they would help get that museum together. There was also a group of teenagers known as the Trailblazers under the auspices of the DC Rec Department. So they were there working. That was the first federally funded Smithsonian Museum. John was the first black director of a Smithsonian museum. He came from a community organization background. I didn't say that. He was so well qualified, superbly qualified. He lived in the neighborhood. And one of the things that neighborhood people said when the hiring for the museum staff was to begin was that everybody had to live in the neighborhood. So those few of us, 5 or 6 of us who were hired, were all within walking distance of the museum. We lived around the corner, up the street, and we had a vested interest in seeing it succeed. John Kennard said that there were 10 or 12,000 people who turned out on September the 15th. I don't know. All I know is that the avenue was crowded. You could hardly move for all of the people who came to that opening. They heard bands playing, they heard speeches, and finally there was the ribbon cutting. And people were then allowed to come into the museum and look around, see what was there, and then they went out the back door into our garden, and there were volunteers who were serving cookies and punch. And then they went on to tell everybody what they were going to see. What did they see? They saw a space capsule. They saw a country store. They saw small boxes filled with artifacts and objects that kids could touch and handle. They saw a small zoo, monkeys, snake, Mr. Wiggly, the children called him, and a parrot, George, who was so noisy. We put him in the bathroom most of the time so that he would discover this so that he would not, so he would let the people who were supposed to be talking talk. Oh, we also had a stage, and when we had performances, we simply moved the portable panels, exhibit panels, back to the wall and set up chairs. And some of the performances were standing room only. But it was a very exciting time for us. What do I want to say? About a year or so later, when we looked at what had been made for us, we didn't have any input into what was going to come into the museum. We began talking about what would be more related to our community, people who were coming in and out. And Jim Mayo was the only person on the staff then who had museum experience. None of us had been museum goers. We didn't know anything about museums, what they were supposed to do. But Jim Mayo said, you know, there's a wonderful exhibit at the National Portrait Gallery. It's called the Harmon Collection. And there are these wonderful portraits of Black Americans, big. We should, we did. And it caused a sensation when we sent the space capsule back, when we took out a lot of things to make way for the portraits. We kept the zoo for a little while longer. But one of the children said, I've never seen so many colored people in my life. Life-changing. And that was the beginning of our venture into Black history and culture. Ever after that, things that we had made. John Kennard gave the museum life, direction, and meaning. Some called him the conscience of the museum world. Others said he showed museum people what museums should and be like. Most people, after they heard him speak, agreed that museums needed to be instruments of change. And the exhibits that people saw over the years carried that message. I said that John Kennard had a community organization background. He worked with Operation Crossroads Africa, traveled the continent. He also worked for, the State Department. Didn't work for, well, he traveled. He traveled for the State Department, USIA. 2 years, oh goodness, it was 20 years after we opened, 1987. A man named Kenneth Hudson wrote a book called Museums of Influence. In it, he named among these museums the Little Anacostia Museum. He said that the Anacostia Museum was one of the world's most influential museums in the last 200 years. That's a lot to say. 200 years. This list did not include the Louvre, Paris, the J. Paul Getty in California, any Smithsonian museum, not one. And he included the Anacostia Museum because he said it had broken ground in such an unusual or striking way that other museums felt compelled to follow its example. That was a pleasant surprise. I can't begin to enumerate all of John's accomplishments in Anacostia, in the city, across the country, and abroad. He addressed so many concerns, from transportation plans for the Anacostia area, employment concerns with the city and with the Smithsonian, because when we came on, there wasn't anybody, I don't think, at a level higher than, I'll say, curator. But there were no black folk or minorities in positions, high positions. Anyway, he testified before Congress, before the DC Council, helped found the African American Museums Association. He was just active in so many groups. Everybody knew him. When a lot of changes occurred under John, he was able to get a $40,000 grant from the Junior League, and with that we purchased a jitney bus. Took it all over the city, to hospitals and to schools and to libraries, playgrounds, wherever people would allow us to come. And that jitney bus had portable exhibits, artifacts, there were speakers, and there was an educational kit that people could borrow. It's under Ahmed Iqbalia. We knew him as Fletcher Smith, lived in the neighborhood, and he was the director of that jitney bus. We brought the first black Santa Claus to Anacostia. He came by helicopter, landed on the roof of the Curtis Brothers store. And Darrell Smith's orchestra or band from Anacostia accompanied him up the street with the Pom Pom Girls. We celebrated Kwanzaa, African American holiday in December. Developed a quick kit. We developed the George Washington Carver Nature Trail behind the museum with the help of a number of people. We dismantled the country store, and in its place we installed a children's room that was packed every day after school, Saturday and Sunday. And we used it also to develop experimental programs that we could send to other museums. I want to say a word about YAC, the Youth Advisory Council. These were all kids who lived in the neighborhood. All were in walking distance, as the staff was. They came mainly from Anacostia High School. And one of them had approached John to say, I didn't hear anything about teenagers when the museum was open, and John said, well, come talk with me about it and bring some ideas. There was Gregory Jones. Gregory Reynolds, I'm sorry. We also had Gregory Jones. These young people elbowed their way into the museum's hierarchy. They designed and produced their own exhibits. They silk-screened their Christmas cards, the Black Angel, to augment their travel fund. We traveled to Puerto Rico. We traveled to Nassau. Some of them traveled to Africa, Botswana, Ghana, the Gambia, and about four. Most now are married, children. Some, I guess, have grandchildren. But one of them became a staff member at the museum. Another is now the director of a program, in a community program in Northeast, and worked for the city government. They did so well. One I'll mention in particular was Gregory Reynolds, who actually started YAC. He grew up in Barry Farms. Said people used to make fun of him as he was growing up because he was interested in another kind of dance form. When he graduated from Anacostia High School, he was, tell me how much time. Okay. Graduated from Anacostia and found a family that would board him in Maryland. He left Barry Farms, went out to Maryland, and he graduated from high school in Maryland. Was able to get a scholarship to Sarah Lawrence College, where he studied dance. When he graduated from Sarah Lawrence, he was able to get an internship with the Alvin Ailey Dancers. That's how good he was. And he left the Alvin Ailey Dancers, got a position with the renowned Paul Taylor Dancers. When it was time to leave them, he said, start my own dance company. And he started the Greg Reynolds Dance Company. They had their debut in, I think, Australia. This is Gregor Reynolds. He did so well, that he always came back to the museum whenever he had breaks, and he would teach classes free for neighborhood children. Gregory died of AIDS some years ago, but he certainly lives in our hearts. I want to mention 2 exhibits. One, The Rat, Man's Invited Affliction. It's different. It certainly addressed a problem we had in Anacostia. The city did a survey and told us that we had an 85% infestation rate. And we focused on the ecology of the rat. We included a simulated environment of the room. You looked in the upper windows, you saw rats running around in a trash, garbage-strewn backyard. Then if you looked at windows underneath those, you saw rats playing in their burrows. And we were able to adjust the lighting so that sometimes it was daytime for them, we saw them, and sometimes it was night, and we could see them in their burrows. That was a collaborative effort because children told us what they wanted to see. Teenagers told us, adults told us, and the Smithsonian Traveling Exhibition Service prepared it for travel. So it did travel outside of our community. I visited one museum that had asked for it in New York. I sat through what the docent was saying to the group, the children. This is about rats and we've seen it. But she ended, children, there are live rats in that room. And everybody started screaming, yelling. That was the end of, they went into the room, but I don't know that they learned all of the things that we wanted them to know. That was the tour. The other exhibition was Lorton Reformatory, Beyond Time. We worked, the idea for the exhibit came from one of our maintenance people, Wee. He said you ought to do something that speaks to men who are in prison. And John said, I think that's a good idea. So let's work with them. So we made so many visits to Lorton to plan the exhibit with the residents there. The guards in the tower would say, oh, it's Anacostia again, open the gates. And as we'd walk through the street, they'd holler to us, hey, hi, Mr. Kennard. Hi, Miss Martin. I was Martin then. Hi, Miss Martin. You remember me? It was one of the, our museum was packed every day. People wanted to see this exhibit that the men had helped us put together, that the Department of Corrections brought them to the museum so they could help fabricate and put that museum together. The Lorton Gospel Group, the band, and especially the Inner Voices. It was a drama group that had developed Christmas in Time. wonderful, wonderful production. No one who saw it could forget it. And as I said, the museum was packed every day, and at night when there were discussions. I guess, should I?
If you can finish
Okay.
it. Yeah, go ahead.
I think John would have been proud of the new museum on the mall. He was disappointed that Anacostia never had a larger museum. He wanted to see something down at Poplar Point across from the Navy Yard on the banks of the river. That never came to be. He was able to expand exhibits, design, research departments. We were able to produce the catalogs. Louise Hutchinson, excellent writer. So there were many things that he said, I'm so glad, I'm proud of that, but he never saw the new museum. So he fought a lot of battles, won some, lost some. And I'll just leave you with this. He never stopped fighting for his community. To grasp the magic of the Anacostia Museum, people traveled here from all over the country and all over the world. They tried to understand how so small an operation could have such an enormous effect on the lives of so many people and institutions. What they discovered and took away with them is testament to the enduring legacy of John Kennard.
Very nice.
I thank you for your attention.
Pretty
Back
wonderful.
to you.
Yeah, I mean, even as Zora is, speaking so quietly, I mean, I mean, today we take these things for granted, that museums actually engage in contemporary issues and in things that matter to people. I mean, it just didn't happen then. And I remember the rat exhibit, and not everybody was excited about the rat exhibit because they did not think that a museum should concern itself with a subject like that. It was shocking,
Yes.
and rats
live
running
rats
around a
and-
museum,
Yeah.
and so much of what she describes, they were the first. They were the first to think of these things and to think that that it had value and that it was worth discussing. So, yeah. Even the engagement, and I'd forgotten that part, the engagement with young people and teenagers in that way, where they were actually telling you what they wanted to see. All of that was cutting edge stuff. So thank you for reminding me and for letting other people know. Any questions for Zora?
First, my name is Art Slater. I am Secretary-Treasurer of the Anacostia Coordinating Council that holds its monthly meetings in the Anacostia Community Museum. And Ms. Zora is a longtime generous supporter of the organization. So I'm just thrilled to be here and to have you here as a resource. What I wanted to ask you was, in light of the new African American Museum, will the ACM be able to maintain its integrity and its purpose? I know it has a slightly different mission, but will it be able to, be strong and maintain itself in light of the bigger museum on the mall?
Well, two different museums. Is anybody here who can speak?
Samir?
That's just
Some
what
people
it's
report
like.
to one another.
It's staff member.
Yep,
Staff
there's a
member,
staff.
maybe he should answer that question.
Oh, we actually have 4 staff members here.
Oh, really?
Um,
Great. Oh, that's
I'm
wonderful.
Laverne, Priscilla Wilder,
Ah, great.
educator Tony Thomas, director of advancement Muhammad Abdul Rashid.
Sorry, Blade.
I mean, I'm happy to speak to that. Maybe others can as well. This year, the museum is celebrating its 50th anniversary.
50?
50. Yeah.
50.
So September 15th, 1967 was the day that it opened, and we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary this September 15th. About a decade or so ago, the museum shifted its mission a bit in light of the fact that the new museum was opening up on the mall. And in many ways, the shift in mission was a return to the kind of work that Ms. Zora has been talking about, that the museum did from day one, really, which was doing exhibitions and programming that spoke to the contemporary social issues that communities like Anacostia, but communities across the country, around the world. And so the museum is really still focused on those kinds of issues, and I think in a renewed kind of way. So we continue to be a kind of community-focused, community-engaged museum, and in that sense, very distinct from the new museum on the mall, and like the rest of the museums on the mall, whose focus is national and not as engaged with the local community. So I think that is one way in which the museum will continue in the tradition that was really pioneered by Ms. Zora and John Kennard and others, of being a museum that responds to the interests and concerns of communities in Washington and beyond. But I'm happy to, if other folks would like to speak to that as well.
The answer to that question is being debated now. It is not in the hands of the museum staff. We can have input, but it is really not our position. Everything that the castle is the place where the brain trust of the institution is located. And within the castle, there's been a lot of demands placed on us over the last 2.5 years. We have addressed all of those inquiries, produced what they wanted, and still they haven't made a decision on approving what we have stated our new goal and mission is going to be, and neither have they provided what they thought it should be. But Zora, you said something that just illuminated a fact that I had not considered. When you talked about Mr. Hansen and the book that he wrote about the top museums, Hudson, okay. And the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum was cited, and none of the other museums in this institution. Now I sort of have an insight as to the attitude of the rest of the Smithsonian towards Anacostia, because we still continue in the tradition that you started and produce programs that the rank and file of our culture desires to see, because it tells a story of them no matter where they are located. And we have something to offer in a community engagement format that the rest of the institution can't do. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Some of the other people couldn't be here today, but it's been very illuminating for me just listening to what you had to say and the history of where we came from. Thank you.
I guess that means it's my turn. Ms. Zora, First and foremost, I'd like to apologize for being late, but I do bring greetings on behalf of Director Lori Yarish from the Anacostia Museum. She wishes that she could be here, but she's still working on the project that I was working on when I left, and it kind of leads greatly into the question that was put forward. I am, as a director, I'm actually privy to a lot of information that some of my colleagues are not, and one of the reasons why I was late is because we received a request for a budget justification for a significant amount of capital that can potentially be invested by the institution into Anacostia. My apologies. I was saying that the reason why I was late is because I was working on a budget justification and narrative for the Secretary of the Smithsonian as it relates to potential investment, significant investment into the museum. So I was working on that along with Lori Yarish and one of our staff folks to bring that together. The Smithsonian as a whole understands the value of Anacostia. A lot of what the Smithsonian is doing as far as their new direction, as far as being a convener of conversations and trying to stick their toe into the social impact realm and not count the success of the museums by visitorship, but more so by impact, is a place where the Anacostia Museum has been from the very beginning, and they're just now starting to realize that. So we're getting a lot of interest, a lot of individuals are coming to the museum to see what we're doing. One of the things that's interesting about the ACM is that it started out with that mission and then kind of meandered away from it and kind of became a little bit of all things to all people, and we became the, kind of African American museum before there was the new Museum of African American History and Culture. So as we go through this process and we go through this revitalization process, for me, I look at it more as a renaissance period for the museum, a kind of getting back to our roots of really dealing with social issues and being that convener of conversations around what's actually taking place on a grassroots level. So highlighting and showcasing that is really important, and really telling that story, not just east of the river, not isolating ourselves so we're just in Anacostia, but telling those stories of communities around the region and in some ways around the country and around the world. And I think that's what's really driving this. Anacostia, the museum itself, is a representation of people. And telling the stories of people. There was a recent article done about our current exhibit, Gateways, in the Washington Post, and the writer specifically said that we told the story of ordinary people in extraordinary ways. And I think that that's very telling as it relates to who we are and what we do and what our mission and value and contribution is, both to the Smithsonian as well as to the communities in which we call home. So I honestly believe that Anacostia, once we finish going through this renewal process and we finish, knocking a little bit of the dust off and the dirt and shining, that not just the Smithsonian, but the museum community around the world will once again begin to look at the museum as a model for community-based programming and knowledge creation research.
I just have one or two comments. Actually, my story history in the Smithsonian, I've been at the Smithsonian for 38 years now. And after my first stipend internship, which was at the National Collection of Fine Arts, I rotated to Anacostia, where I worked for 3 years. And I worked in some of the exhibits that Zora spoke about today. And so I bear witness to how the Anacostia and its public programming, especially its outreach to local community, has set the stage for how the larger museums have worked in the past and most likely will need to work continually. The problems that are associated, and I work at the National Museum of American History. And so I was an exhibit specialist working on the exhibits there. At one time I was the only exhibit specialist, but then I rotated to American history, and I have been in charge of director for 17 years now. And so we build and install exhibits there. But in that time, the direct connection between what we do at American History, in particular, the program in African American culture, which was headed by Bernice Regan at one time, and then the second day was headed by Neata Kilkenny. And that program built on the model of community involvement. We had a big program called the Duke Ellington program for the youth program, where we invited area high school students to come to the Smithsonian and do poetry and dance and put on exhibitions there. And so for about 10 or 12 years, it was the Smithsonian's major expression for outreach to communities. There's always this tension between the Smithsonian being national in scope and then being local in scope. In order to be relevant in a way that's measurable with predictability, they need a local component to make that real, because they need a continuous renewal of people coming back all the time. The national audience may be a one-time, once in every 5-year time, but the local audience is the life of the Smithsonian. And so, in its breadth and energy, the program African American Culture was the primary expression in the largest Smithsonian for all things related to African American, celebrating the culture itself. And so, in that role, we had blockbuster experiences that canvassed and brought in people from everywhere, from symposiums and stuff, and had a major presence in the institution. And as time changes, the focus of the institution changes as well. And with that focus, the focus, as the gentleman said, Anacostia went from local to being the Mid-Atlantic regional repository of African American culture. That took it in a different direction. That Steve was there at that point. And I think it's good that it returns to the local community, because as I am now chair of the Smithsonian African American Association itself, we also trying to find a way to have local access. Let me say it a different way. We are trying to have access for underrepresented groups at the Smithsonian, so we can change the color of how the Smithsonian looks. And so the Smithsonian is a unique place where internships and fellowships, primarily internships, are pivotal in how people get hired for the Smithsonian. Probably 60% of the people who come to work at the Smithsonian has a prior relationship with the Smithsonian. So if you are successful getting interns and fellows to come to the Smithsonian, you have an opportunity to then have an effect on how the color complexion of the Smithsonian can change. And so we are working vigorously to try to get back to some of the models that were established at Anacostia that I know well, and trying to have that broad-based community involvement again. I've just proposed and have talked to the secretary and his undersecretary, about 5 of the 7 or so undersecretaries, about a new program called Access for Youth Stipend Internships, and it's geared for underrepresented groups to come to the Smithsonian as an internship. And then the second part of that is something called Shadow Ops externships. And these are opportunities for local people especially to come to the Smithsonian, and a shadow opportunity where they spend 1 to 3 days in an office of the Smithsonian. Smithsonian is like a major city, a small city, let me put it that way, but all the various forms of government and offices there. And we have enough opportunity then for people who are in local and high school and colleges to come to the Smithsonian to get a first-hand preview of what working in the real world is all about. And so in that way, we can influence African Americans working at a higher level in the Smithsonian. You're correct. There are few, in my building there's probably 1 or 2 curators, starting differently because we had about 18 new curators. But as you look across the institution, there are not very many people at 13, 14 levels in the institution after all of these years. All of these years. And so there's a lot of work to be done with that. So part of the model that you all are trying to get back to of local involvement, that is still the model for how the Smithsonian can be relevant to people on a daily basis. And if you take that same model of involvement in local communities and make that a local visitation from area schools to the Smithsonian to get an idea of what it does, it then hopefully will set up a pipeline. So from coming to look at how the Smithsonian works in its offices, those same people would be the same people who would be applying for the internship, the stipend internship, to come and work at the Smithsonian. That's what we're trying to establish here. But much of what I do today is centered on the time, the 3 years that I spent at Anacostia, and my dedication to people and the culture of how the Anacostia was involved with people, and I resonate with that. I have an intern here today who's going to do a feature on Zora for an upcoming new design for our AAA website. And so that's how important and significant I think her role is as a model for us and for the people who don't know the history of the Smithsonian, don't know the history in particular of Anacostia Museum and its impact on the Smithsonian as a whole. And I was there when people came from all parts of the country to visit the museum, because it was the place where people came to find out how a museum can be involved and change a community. It was the hub of that, from people from South Africa to all over the land for that. The size of the first place does not measure the impact of the place. And so Zora was the education specialist. I remember the kit that I worked on and made, the red kits with the little African symbol on the front that traveled for probably 15 years around the city as something for people to put into their local schools to talk about African American history and culture. So we celebrate Zora, and I celebrate her today with my presence here and the impact she's had on me in my life and my life work, which is primarily internships and access in the Smithsonian, because unless somebody makes a concerted effort to do that, 10 years from now it's going to look the same way. And it's going to take the local involvement with where you can have a consistent pressure put on the Smithsonian. You need to change the number, the look and feel of the Smithsonian in order to be relevant. The encouraging thing I say about the new museum is that it has blown away the notion that black folks don't go to museums. It has blown away the notion that black people don't collect objects that are worthy to go into the museum. Because with the advent of the museum, black folks have come out of the woodworks with objects that nobody ever knew they had. Priceless objects, one-of-a-kind objects. And there have been numerous opportunities over the time where people were working on subject matter. They wanted objects, but they couldn't uncover the objects. One of the major differences between Anacostia and its mission and African American history and culture is that museums are shaped by their collections that they have. And their mission is based on the collections that they have. Anacostia is unique that it can have any kind of expression that it wants in and outside of its collection itself. And so that's a unique place that I think it should have and continue. So those are just a few of my comments in terms of Zora herself and the impact of Anacostia in the larger Smithsonian, which is still being felt. When people try to figure out a way to go back into the community, have a community outreach, Anacostia is a prime example of how you get done.
Yeah, we receive calls all the time.
Yeah. And the program of African American culture and this big thing built on the methodology of how you outreach to communities that was established and validated at the Anacostia Museum.
Okay, I want to take one more question, two more questions, but we do have to close off in another few minutes.
Hello,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, Lisa.
my name is Lisa Hazel. I'm part of the DC Living Heritage Network, and I work in film production, and I have a company called Paper Doll Journal and Paper Doll Living, which is online and live experiences to engage people in embracing family histories and connecting to larger institutions for opportunities to grow self-awareness, personal growth, and creative fulfillment. I'm particularly interested in outreach and engagement of youth, especially African American youth, and to give some background on what my research interest is public relations and communication strategies and theories as museums, with their commitments to engaging diverse communities. What I appreciate from having a chance to be here and to hear your talk and learn about your experiences is the point where you were talking about the Youth Advisory Council, and those are very popular now. Youth teen councils, youth councils, maybe it's resonates from Anacostia and some other museums, and I was very pleased to hear you talk about the trajectory of some of the youth and how they were moved on to do very prominent and significant things. What I was curious of is, did the museum support help direct from a professional development space or as a museum education director, like when the youth, when the council was there, did they get some support from the museum on understanding what those opportunities were, or to like make apply to internships, or to create the resume and so forth? And so the the other part to that is my master's thesis from Johns Hopkins was in communicating in contemporary society, was attracting diverse audiences to museums and cultural institutions and examining the Smithsonian's strategic plan. And what the findings were is that there was no, this was a little over 5 years ago, and the content analysis of how often diversity was used was pushing 100 in the strategic plan, without any commitment to the attraction as to qualify and quantify, and tied to funding that was specifically earmarked with the responsibility of diversity engagement. So part B to that is I'm very active in museum communities, especially here in the Smithsonian, and I'm from New York, but with dealing with youth chair committees and under Mayor Bloomberg and such, when I'm asking museum education directors here, Smithsonian, National Building Museum, and so forth, on what support is there within these programs, like, oh, bring the teens here, like Art Lab, design apprenticeship program at the National Building Museum, they're saying, oh, that's not what we do. It lends to, we're not social workers, we're not babysitters, the families, the parents should do that. And when I'm hearing you talk, and it sounds like there was some nurturing and directing of how to tie into those opportunities instead of going over them.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to make your point and then get Zora to have the last word.
I'll just give you a point. I'll ask my question later.
Later? All right, Zora, you can have the last word on all of the
Oh, my.
that you've heard.
I think I've said all I need to say. Thank you so much for letting me be here and talk about a few things.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, it sounds like some more conversations need to go on around Smithsonian's outreach and Smithsonian's engagement with young people. So if you guys are game to come back, we're glad we would do something on
I
that.
have one more point to
Yeah, but you gotta be quick about
No,
this.
I'm gonna be really quick, because part of what, like last year maybe, I think I saw you that time when I was there, my hair was different, that I was a member of the Textile Museum, and with the Historical Society, we got a bus, the shuttle that went over to look at the Anacostia Museum. I was really excited to do that. Had never been there, and maybe not even really throughout any parts of Southeast as a New Yorker. I was floored, and not in a good way, because as the bus drove up. No, as the bus drove up, the museum looked gorgeous, and landscaping and everything was very nice, and to think that it's a community museum, a neighborhood museum, and right across the street, landscaping, at least as of last year, was horrendous. It looked severely blighted, and my concern is what part of the Smithsonian is not talking to, at least if it's not their responsibility, to the city, or to put some pressure on, at least have these children or multi-generations of community who have to look out of their windows every single day and see a meticulous, manicured institutions that's proclaiming that we're for the community, and it is it's extremely blighted, almost to the point of looking like blaxploitation for a 1970s movie. And I say those points not in, oh, don't get everybody away. I say those points in support of, with all the redevelopment and all these cute restaurants and everything, how is it that the lights keep going off every night and right across the street you see extremely dilapidated conditions? So
That's going to take
That's
more time to discuss than we.
yeah, no. I just wanted to make sure to say that because that was on my mind without any
Yeah,
ears
and there are
to.
cultural institutions that have gotten involved in that kind of community development. So it's a worthwhile question. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you,
Well, I would
all
be
of
in
you
support
guys,
to
for being
make
here
some
today.
noise with you guys.